always anxious to get some mercy from Srila Prabhupada in the form of his belongings, something that we could hold on to. And I also would do this very often as his servant. I would try to get something from Srila Prabhupada. And the very first opportunity I had that I remember was when I had gotten Brahmin initiation, which again was in Los Angeles in 1972. I had my Brahmin thread, I think, all of maybe 1 month. And this was the thread, of course, that Prabhupada had chanted on. And in New Vrindavan, when we used to go bathe, you would have to go outside, and there was a little stream that was dammed up, and you would grab water and throw it over your body. It was quite nice, quite cold. But depending on the position of the moon, whether it was new moon or full moon, it could be very dark at 4 o'clock in the morning. So one morning I remember going and bathing, going to the brook there and throwing buckets of semi-mud and water over my head to bathe in the morning in New Vrindavan. And when I got back to my quarters, my Brahmin thread was gone. I went to chant Gayatri and my thread was gone. Because I was very young and very much attached to it, and I was totally devastated that now, that link had shattered. That link was gone. I thought, this is definitely a very bad omen. Something's not good here. Of course, then we didn't have Brahmin threads from India, neither. You just you got some string and you tied it in a knot, You would get six of them, and that was your Brahmin thread. So that's what I had to do to continue chanting my Gayatri, and I did it. But I was never content. I always felt that I needed that. And of course, even there now I had become his servant. For some reason, there was no question of asking him, would you chant on a thread for me? But I devised a plan. After being with him for a month, he told me that whenever Ekadasi was there, that he would change his Brahmin thread on Ekadasi. And he said, so at this time, he said, you can put the thread on the table. And so I was all prepared. I said, well, now I will get Prabhupada's old Brahmin thread, because he's going to take it off and place it on the table. And Prabhupada was bathing, so I set up this table, put the tilak out, the mirror out, and I put a nice Brahmin thread and laid it right on the table. Today was Ekadasi. And I watched. This was in Radha Damodar temple, where Prabhupada was staying in the room downstairs. And I was on the veranda right outside, and I was just sitting there watching and waiting. I was so happy. Now I was going to get my Brahmin thread back. And Prabhupada put on his tilak and put the second thread around and began chanting Gayatri. So now I was busy in the kitchen with Jamuna, helping getting his lunch together. And Prabhupada chanted Gayatri. And then he left his quarters and he walked by the veranda into the kitchen to take prasadam. And I raced into the room, and I found this Brahmin thread, and he had broken every thread, all 6 of them. He broke them all. And I thought, why did he do this? And I immediately started thinking he must know something. He must have done this because I wanted his thread. Of course, I was very stubborn, so I grabbed each thread and I tied it in a little knot. All 6 of them. I thought, now I have my Brahmin thread. He said, despite everything, I still have it. Prabhupada's chanted on it, I thought, so many times, so it's better than my original Brahmin thread. So I took the Brahmin thread and put it in my pocket. And then I went in where Prabhupada was taking prasadam. And he said, so that Brahmin thread that I've left on the table? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. He said, so you should take that Brahmin thread and dig under Tulsi Devi and bury it under a Tulsi plant. I thought, no, this is impossible. Like, is this what they do, or is he just doing this to me? And I said, okay, Srila Prabhupada. Of course, I didn't obey that order because I was so determined. It was one order that Srila Prabhupada gave that I just reneged on because I thought I have to have this Brahmin thread. So I took it and disobeyed his instruction. But that was the beginning of many different opportunities I had to get a piece of Maha Prasadam in the form of cloth from Srila Prabhupada. I got to go to New York where I got initiation. And of course I was with Kirtanananda, who was sannyasi. He had a lot of a lot of pull, then I would get to sit right by Srila Prabhupada on his Vyasasana on Henry Street, which was packed. And I don't know if you would have ever been on 439 Henry Street. It was not a very big temple room, and New York was very crowded, and everyone was from all the visiting Columbus Temple, Pittsburgh Temple, New Vrindavan. Devotees from everywhere would come to New York to see Srila Prabhupada. And I got the benefit to go on morning walks because I was with Kirtanananda. I was his servant. And so I would go on the morning walk. So I was getting some personal association in that way. And I remember one day, this was my first close contact to him, was in the temple room. And what had happened was devotees were just crunched standing there at kirtan, as Prabhupada was having kirtan before class. And then we would all bow down to pay our obeisances, which of course would take up a lot more room when we knelt down. So when I got up, there was a devotee behind me whose head was right at my feet. So I got up, and he got up at the same time and pushed me forward, which I was right beside Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana, and I just fell like right across his Vyasasana, kind of on him a little bit, and I literally fell onto him. And he just looked over and he said, "So what is the difficulty?" And I just, like a mouse, I said, "Nothing, Srila Prabhupada," and I just cowered back into my space there. And then that was stopped from there. But that was my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada, where I made my presence known. So in the afternoons, we would get to go to the Krishna book readings, and fortunately, I got to be the designated reader every day. We would sit, and sometimes Prabhupada would sit there and he would make comments during the readings, and sometimes he would just sit very quietly. Sometimes he would laugh. And I can remember I would always try to find stories about demons, because more than anything, Prabhupada would react. He would usually be laughing. When Krishna was killing the demons, he would get reactions and he would laugh about it. And one day in searching for something, he said, "Just read from anywhere." He said, "Krishna is like a sweet ball." He said, "Wherever you bite, it's sweet." So then I quickly got to the next page and began reading. Kirtananda said, he cooks. He said, "I've trained him in cooking." He said, "He cooks very nicely." He said, "But he doesn't know how to massage yet." Prabhupada said, "Anyone can massage." He said, "It's not very difficult." And Kirtananda went aside, and Prabhupada said, "So," he said, "follow me." And we went outside, and he said, "Take the lota." So I grabbed the lota, and I was holding it. And we walked outside about 20, 30 paces, and he said, "Give me the lota." And I handed him the lota. And he went off into the trees, into the bushes, to pass. So then he came back after a few minutes, and he handed me the lota. He said, "Here, now wash this." and I became very aware of what my service was as Prabhupada's servant, that, no matter what the menial thing to do, that this is what I did. And I took great pleasure in it. I thought, well, this is great. I'm actually going to be taking care of Prabhupada in whatever little need he had. Another lesson in massage, which was always, as Prabhupada's servant, massaging was the best time, being in such close contact, doing nice service, getting to massage Prabhupada's body, especially his feet, was always made you feel very good. And during massage, in the daytime, Prabhupada would usually go over mail. His secretary would come in, and Prabhupada would hear the letters, and he would give answers for his letters. And while he was doing this, of course, you were massaging him. And when you massage Srila Prabhupada, you would start on his head, and you would just continually massage his head until he said, "Okay." Or he would just give a gesture with his body, and then you would go to the next spot. So sometimes in this process, if he would be very immersed in something, you could massage a particular part of his body for a very long time. Massage generally lasted about 1 hour, but sometimes it would go 2 hours, 2.5 hours, if he was absorbed in his business. And it was, of course, very nice, but it could also become a little bit tiring. And after being with him for some time, I started to feel I knew what I was doing, quite well. So I would massage his head, and when I felt that I was done, completed that point, I had done it sufficiently, I would move on to the next part of his body. And I was doing this for probably 1 week or so. And one day I was massaging, and I remember I was massaging his head, and then I went and I massaged his back, and he didn't say anything, and then I stopped massaging his back, and I started to get up and move around to the side, and he said, "You massage until I tell you to stop, not until you tell you to stop." And from that time on, of course, massage had taken a different turn again to whatever Srila Prabhupada wanted. That's what I would do. Of course, Bombay, there were 2 kinds of cars, basically, that I can remember seeing. One was, I guess it was some old Plymouth blueprints they had, and they produced all these particular cars. I don't remember what they called it. And then there was the Ambassador. So everyone either had this Ambassador or this Plymouth-looking car. And we had gone on a morning walk, and we had one of these Plymouth-looking cars. And it was with myself and Pradyumna and Shyamasundar. And Shyamasundar was driving, and we parked the car, and we got out, and we were walking along. We had a very nice walk, and some 1 hour and a half later, we walked back to the car, and Shyamasundar trying to get into the car. The doors were unlocked, so we're in, and he's trying to stick the key in the ignition, and this is going on for a few minutes, and he says, "The key is not working, the key is not working." And Prabhupada said, "So what is wrong?" He said, "I don't know, I can't get the key to work in the car." So we're sitting there for about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, some Indian men, 2 Indian men come up to the car. Now they begin talking to Srila Prabhupada in Hindi, and talking back and forth, and everything is very friendly. And Prabhupada said, "Oh," he said, "this is not our car." He said, "This is their car." And in the meantime, during the conversation, they say, "Swamiji, we will take you to where you're going." And so myself and Srila Prabhupada, we remain in the back seat, and the 2 gentlemen, they get into the front seat of the car. And he said, "So they will take us," he said, "to our place." And Shyamasundar and Pradyumna, they went in the other car. So at this point now, after sitting in their car, the men, they decide that they want to take Srila Prabhupada to his quarters. They don't want it to go, for him to go in his car, so they've convinced him now that they want to do this service because he's a Swami, that we want to take you home. And so we're sitting back there, and Prabhupada said, "See," he said, "this is the difference," he said. "In your country," he said, "if we would have been sitting in someone's car," he said, "immediately they would have arrested us." He said, "But here, you sit in their car and they take you home." He said, "They want to take you home." Even sometimes at breakfast, maybe having halava, which was unheard of on a normal basis. But if he was, like I remember in London, Bhaktivedanta Manor, where it was colder, we were there one time when it was cool, and he was requesting heavier foods. But normally, it was that his main meal was at lunch, and then sometimes in the evening, hot milk was very regular in the evening, and sometimes with a puffed rice when that was available. Especially in India, they had a nice puffed rice. Sometimes, again, I remember when I was with him early, like in 72 and 73, he would have me make parathas. He showed me how to make paratha, plain paratha, which then I would make it a few times. And he would eat parathas and potatoes in the evening. This could be 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. But that was if he felt that he had the appetite. Without appetite, Prabhupada never forced eating. I remember in Los Angeles, sometimes even he had some popcorn, which was Sankirtan, popcorn that was made in the evening. He had that a few times, he tried. But he liked puffed rice, which was light. And he said, if you eat heavy at night, then it is hard to get up in the morning. So he didn't like to eat heavy in the evening because it was difficult to digest. Once, when Prabhupada blasted me, I remember, this was in Vrindavan during Radha Damodar. This was when he spoke from Nectar of Devotion. He had Nectar of Devotion classes every day, every afternoon in the garden. And at this time, I was still only a servant for perhaps 1 month. I was learning a lot still. And when we went into the garden there, I was recording. and there were many flies. They were buzzing about Srila Prabhupada, and he said, so, but no one was, we were just sitting there, everyone was paying attention to class, and he said, get a fan. So I had come and I had a chamara fan, and Prabhupada was speaking, and I was doing this. I was doing an arati ceremony to Srila Prabhupada. Nothing practical at all. Flies were buzzing around, but instead of just chasing flies, I was there. There were many devotees there, and I was enjoying doing this service. I was Prabhupada's servant. There I was, turning the whisk around, and the flies were there, and Prabhupada went and like that, and still I was so, enamored by the situation, and just so dull-headed that I continued, and I'm going like this. So finally, Srila Prabhupada looked at me. He said, get someone up here with some intelligence. And I mean, of course, there were, could have been 100 devotees there, and I was just, I was so devastated. And so I got down, and who should grab the chamara was this devotee, whose name was Kunja Bahari, who was he was known at the time, this was even back in 1972, he was a very crazy devotee, very peculiar, and he went up there, and he started swatting at these flies, So now I'm sitting back about that big by the tape recorder, trying to occupy myself like I have something to do so I don't have to pay attention to what just happened to me. And he's swatting at these flies, And I'm looking up at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada looked at him and nodded his head in appreciation, which just further devastated me at the time, like I had failed. Here I am as servant, and I was a total failure. And so the rest of the class went on, and he continued to harass the flies so that they didn't bother our spiritual master. So he was satisfied, and Kunja Bahari was in ecstasy, and I was still trying to deal with my false ego. We were in his quarters in Los Angeles. And after Prabhupada would take breakfast in his quarters, I would bring his plates back to the servants' quarters, which were down the hall. And I would clean his plates from there and transfer all of the remaining prasadam to distribute. And I took the orange rinds that he had eaten, which was the very first piece of Mahaprasadam I ever had from Srila Prabhupada back in August of '72, was an orange rind. I had taken and I ate the whole rind because it was Mahaprasadam. But now I was a servant, and I took the orange rind and I threw it into the can. I had a little trash can that I had in there. And I distributed the prasadam. And it was later on in the morning, I was beginning to prepare his lunch. I had my own little refrigerator there, a little 2-burner stove right in the servants' quarters. So I was getting everything ready. I was cutting vegetables. I had a little board. It was probably a 1x12 and about 4 foot long, and it was on 2 cinder blocks. This was the kitchen, and a 2-burner gas stove that had been disconnected, I guess, from gas heat that was in the room, and they connected a gas stove. So I was beginning to prepare his lunch, cutting vegetables. And Srila Prabhupada, as he would do, many times he would go out of his room, like in the morning, late morning, and he would walk back and forth in his quarters there and chant. And so he was passing through the hallway. So he walked by, and he saw me cutting vegetables, and he saw the orange rind in the trash can. Well, that was it. He just jumped all over me, just kept saying that. He said, what is this? He said, this moochie thing, he said, you have sitting there in the can. He said, you are preparing lunch, he said, for the deities, and you have in the can eaten orange. And I didn't have time, could not say anything. And there's one thing I never did was say anything to Srila Prabhupada when he was yelling at me. And he said, do they do this down in the deity kitchen? He said, they have garbage in the can, he said, and at the same time they're preparing for the deity. Do they do that downstairs? I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. So, but you are doing it up here? He said, you are so moochie. He said, and he kept saying over and over again, he said, you are so moochie. He said, you are malecha. He said, how can you do this? So anyway, this went on for approximately 5 minutes. And it wasn't at this time, but a later time where Prabhupada was he was arguing with me. And he would say that, he would say, so why do you do this? And I would say, I'm just a fool. And at the one time he said to me, he said, you are no fun, he said, to argue with. He said, because you never fight back. We were taking an interior flight on Air India, and we got on the plane, and while everyone was getting seated, we were sitting down, and they had the music very loud. It was Indian classical music, sitar and tabla. And I'm sitting down, and Prabhupada's sitting next to me, and he said, "So," he said, "do you like this music?" And I just looked at him, and I thought, this is a trick question or something. It's like, because I mean, it was nice music, and I thought, but this is not Krishna conscious music. This is Maya, you know. So I just stopped, and I didn't say. And I didn't even answer him. I just didn't have the ability to answer him because I hated to be wrong. You know, this was part of my difficulty. I could never answer honestly because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And so finally he said, "This is very nice music." He said, then of course I was, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, this is very nice music." But I didn't want to be in that position of saying the wrong thing. And that's probably why I didn't say too much while I was with Srila Prabhupada. On so many occasions, Prabhupada gave me things. One in particular I can remember was very funny. Was after I was married and had a child, and I became Prabhupada's servant. I was traveling with him. So my son now, with Mayapur Chandra Das, was about 6 months old, and we were in Los Angeles. And Prabhupada called me in his room, and he said, "Call Nanda Kumar. I want to see him." So I went and I found him. He was in the community. And a few minutes later we came back, and we both went into the room and paid our obeisances, and Nanda Kumar came in. So I was about to get up and leave. He said, "No." He said, "Sit down." He said. So he said, "Get me my white bag." So Prabhupada's white bag, this of course is something else that was very special. When Prabhupada traveled, he had his luggage, and we had our luggage, and then he had his white bag. Well, Prabhupada's white bag is where he kept all his very important effects, whether they be bank books for Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Mayapur Vrindavan Trust, his personal effects, everything that was on his desk, his pens, were given to him. He might have a gold cross pen given by a disciple, his tilak mirror containers, silver. So that was all in this bag. And some money that he would keep. Sometimes he would always keep just a little bit of money with him. And he said, "So get me this white bag." So I got the white bag and I brought it back into his room. We were sitting there, and he went into his white bag and he took out a $50 bill, and he gave it to Nanda Kumar, and he took out another one and he gave it to me. He said, "These are for your children," he said. And Nanda Kumar immediately, of course, objected. "No, Srila Prabhupada," he said, "I can't take this from you." And Prabhupada said, "It's not for you." He said, "It's for your son." Immediately stopped the objection, which Prabhupada was very good at. If he wanted to stop an objection from someone, he could stop it very quickly. I was massaging him. This was in Bhaktivedanta manner. And for some reason we would always have a bottle of mustard oil and it was always one of those little aluminum tins of sandalwood oil, which he would use sandalwood oil on his head for massage. Unless he was ill, then there was no cold oil applied to his head. And then mustard oil on the rest of his body. And he would sometimes, during massage, he would put the lid back on the oil, on the mustard oil. So this particular day, I was sitting behind him, and I was rubbing his head with sandalwood oil. And after finishing his head, then I was doing that. We were alone in the room. I was massaging his back, and massaged his back with the mustard oil, of course, which was now in the bottle, which I didn't put the lid back on because it was not a problem. Anyway, I got up from his back and proceeded to move around to his side, and I knocked the bottle of mustard oil over on the floor. So immediately he turns around and sees, and he said, "Why didn't you have the lid on the mustard oil?" He said, "You're so foolish." He said, "You will be intelligent when you're 80, he said to me. And he said, "Get a cup." So I ran into the next room and I got a cup. And both Prabhupada and I, now this was a little bottle of mustard oil, and we got the mustard oil, we would putting it on our hands and scraping it into the cup. Scraping, until we got basically all the oil up on the floor. He said, "Now use that oil," he said, "on my body." Because Prabhupada, this was another quality, never ever waste anything. Whatever you use. Whatever you take, you use it. Whatever prasadam you take, you finish it. That was always. So he had me do that. So then I was there and I was massaging his arm, and this was my, I did have some sense of humor with Prabhupada, and we would, I would joke with him on occasion, but this one, it was just an opportunity, and whatever I said to Srila Prabhupada, I would think about once, think about it twice, 3, 4 times before I would say something. So a few minutes went by and I'm massaging Prabhupada, and he's very quiet. He's just got done yelling, and he's very quiet with me, and I'm very quiet, and I'm thinking. So finally, I'm massaging his arm and rubbing, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, I said, thank you so much. I said, I thought it would take a lot longer than that. And he cracked up laughing, and it just everything, it was so funny. He found it very amusing, I said, I thought it would take so many more. I said, I thought it would take so much longer, I said, to become intelligent. So he was real pleased with that, that was funny. Prabhupada, he would be told on so many occasions, devotees would come up and say, this devotee is doing something, or this devotee is not chanting his rounds, he is temple president. And never, never would you hear Prabhupada say then he should be removed. He would say, well, perhaps he is so busy, he does not have time to chant his rounds. Always, it was so interesting because Prabhupada would lecture on the Vyasa-san, and in his writings, in his books, there was always very strict. There was, one must follow the 4 regulative principles, one must chant their 16 rounds, and that was it, and one must be fully engaged in Krishna's service. But as soon as he would be in his quarters and there was some difficulty, then there was nothing but compassion. You've done so much service, see how you can take care of this. You just try, he would say, chant your rounds, and we will see what we can do. There was always an arrangement to be made. He would never reject someone because of a fall down, breaking one of the regulative principles. There was always something we can try to work it out. Of course, if someone said something about the philosophy, then it was instant. That was very bad. Immediately he was gone. But for a fall down, this was, for Prabhupada, this was to be expected, he would say. Once also here in Los Angeles, he said, if it was not, he said, for the chanting of the Maha Mantra, he said, you boys and girls could not do anything. He'd say, in the West, he said, you have so much drug use. He said, you could not accomplish anything, he said, except for the chanting of Hare Krishna. He said, it has enabled you to get all these temples, to get all these devotees. He said, it's simply by Krishna's mercy and the chanting. Je anilo premadana karuna prachu